Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I will be discussing book 1 of the Greatcoats series by Sebastien de Castell, and that of course is Traitor's Blade. So let's get into it. So this book we follow 3 of our main characters, Facio being the main protagonist and his 2 buddies and fellow Greatcoats, Kest and Brasti. Now this entire book revolves around these Greatcoats that have sort of fallen from grace. As the back of the book will tell you, there was a time when they served the king, and the king has been killed, and the Greatcoats essentially disbanded, and they are looked down upon in society throughout this entire world. People call them traitors or tattercloaks, basically just a derogatory term for these kind of washed up judges, soldiers, magisters, all these different things that these people represented. There's a bunch of different families and nobility that are kind of at each other's throats. They are vying for power. And you have all these different dukes that are in charge of these various towns and locations. And there is a big conspiracy happening that the Greatcoats sort of have to unravel and try to save, essentially, society from, because these terrible dukes that are in charge of everything only care about money. They want power. They look down on all of these peasants and lower families. They will basically do whatever they want and rule with an iron fist, and no one can stand in their way. And the Greatcoats are directly opposed to that because the king that they served was trying to break all of that. He was really trying to unite the kingdoms, unite everybody in this world, and not have it be just these warring dukes that are, bloodthirsty and power hungry. And that's really what the Greatcoats stood against. So when you are introduced to our characters, the opening scene is basically showing Facio, Kest, and Brasti in what they're doing now, which is they are essentially bodyguards now. They are just hired by whichever noble lord will hire them. Most of the time they're not even getting paid. And they're kind of getting pissed off, obviously, by this fall from grace that happened to the Greatcoats, because they were once this renowned thing for this king. And now everybody kind of sees them as a joke. They talk down to them. They don't take anybody seriously. And they're kind of just off-putting to most of society. And you follow our main character, Facio. There's a point in the book where you really hone in on Facio himself and kind of get into his mind and see most things through his eyes. And it really focuses on his character and his tortured past and kind of why he is who he is. And what Sebastien de Castell does so well in this book is the pacing of this story. So basically throughout this story, whenever you're in like a Facio chapter or you're following him, there's points in the story where something will happen, or he'll hear a particular sentence, or he'll see somebody, and then there will be a little page break and it'll jump into a flashback to kind of explain and fill in backstory of his character, who he was, like why he thinks a certain way about the situation that's happening. And that was great character growth for me, because Facio quickly became a very likable and sympathetic protagonist. And with all these flashbacks, you really see why he is who he is and what the Greatcoats really stand for. You don't get that much with Kest and Brasti because they are sort of side characters to Facio. This is really, at least in this book, is mainly his story. But the flashbacks really help fill in, who this king was that they served, what the Greatcoats really stood for. And I greatly appreciated that because it was incredibly interesting to learn about, what got them to this point. So branching off of that, just the characters themselves in this book are fantastic. I love Facio as a main character. Because he is the first cantor of the Greatcoats, he does sing, and he sings in combat. I don't know how well he sings, but he multiple times will sing during a combat scene. He's in a fight, he's singing. Other Greatcoats will join in and sing. There's tons of witty dialogue. He reminds me a lot of Harry Dresden in a way, because he's very chivalrous and doesn't like seeing women get hurt and wants to kind of be that, hero in a cape in a sort of way. And the Greatcoats do kind of wear capes. I mean, they're coats, but same point. And just his whole personality, like he's pretty sarcastic and witty while also having that chivalrous attitude that Harry does in Dresden Files. So I got a lot of vibes there. Whereas Kest and Brasti are a little bit more straightforward, but I have a feeling they're going to get fleshed out a lot more in the following books. Because, like I said, this is really Facio's story. And they are there. They're not, completely put in the background, but this is, you're really following Facio throughout this entire thing. And Kest and Brasti, when they are around him, just the three of them, their dynamics, their dialogue is absolutely hilarious. And I love the character work there, as well as the villains in this book. Some of the villains in this book are terrible people. And the whole like draw of this book, or the selling point, is they talk about Abercrombie meeting Dumas, so First Law meeting Three Musketeers. And I totally understand the Three Musketeers part from like a visual standpoint. You have these guys fighting with rapiers. They kind of seem like a lovable band of sort of brigands but honorable thieves kind of way. And I wasn't getting a lot of Abercrombie vibes. Okay, so full disclosure, I have not read Abercrombie, but what I understand of his books is they are very grimdark and violent. And I didn't get a lot of that here, but there are definitely points in this book that you hit that are like, oh, okay, now I understand. Because there are some parts of this book that get quite dark, and one of them actually took me by surprise, and I just got to stop, and I was like, what the? Another thing that I really appreciated and loved about this story was the writing style. Sebastien de Castell is so good at building tension. So there's a particular scene that I have in mind that I don't want to spoil, but just the situation that the characters are in, the way that it's written, I tensed up reading it, because like you kind of understand what's happening, and as the scene is building up and building up, you're just like, oh my god, like how is this person going to get out of this? What's about to happen? And you really feel that, and that was fantastic. And the other thing that I really felt in this story was the passion of the characters themselves. So Facio, as I said, as interesting of a character as he is, he gets a ton of like speeches in this book. And one of them, it's actually in my Goodreads review of this, I pasted the whole, it was like a paragraph of just this fantastic statement that he made when he's just looking at the world around him and just how terrible all these dukes are and how mistreated the like the lower class people are, and just how terrible this world is, and just completely without context, it's incredibly moving. And then you add that layer of context within the story itself, and it really hit hard for me. It was one of the best moments of the book for me, just from like a character standpoint of this is really what this guy is about. And you feel his heart and his soul bared out through this language that he's speaking, and it's just fantastic. I would definitely say that the pacing in this story was pretty on point as well. I could see why some people may struggle with the flashback scenes, simply because it does pull you out of a scene, but I understood why it was necessary, and I actually loved it personally, because something would happen to a character, and then a flashback would happen to kind of explain, like I said, the setup to why they would react that way or why they would think that way, and then come back to that scene. And I really appreciated that. I totally get it if that's not your thing, but for me, I believe that that was necessary, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't typically see that in really anything that I've read so far this year, at least. So that was new for me, and I really enjoyed it. And just the pacing in general overall in the story, it's not non-stop action, but it's pretty action-packed, which is right up my alley. I'm all about action in these fantasy books. And that leads directly into my next thing, which is the combat. So the combat in this book, again, it's not large-scale battles. This is not something like parts of Mistborn or, you know, Lord of the Rings, massive battles happening. This is really kind of one-on-one small group skirmishes, several enemies, a few protagonists, and the way that the combat is described, you can really tell that De Castell studied, you know, swordplay and or writing action scenes, because everything flows so well, and it's explained so in so much detail, and it's fluid and believable. And I don't know, it was just everything about the way that he wrote combat was just completely on point, and probably some of the better combat that I've read in books this year, to be honest. I think the last point that I want to make about the plot itself is based on the very brief moment that I talked about it in the beginning of the video, is that the political intrigue and kind of scheming and background maneuvering that's going on in this world, there's so many different threads being pulled and plots being unraveled throughout, it kept me interested the entire time. And every time there was a reveal, while some of them are probably a little bit more predictable than others, some of them are absolutely a surprise to me. And it's really kept me engaged throughout this story. And honestly, I haven't read a book this quickly probably since I read some of the Red Rising books earlier this year. I was so engaged in this book that it only took me a couple of days to actually read it once I sat down to read it, and it was great. I'm really looking forward to the sequels. I am going to wait probably until next month to start one of the sequels, but absolutely all in on this series after book 1. I highly, highly recommend it. Yeah, I mean, that's going to wrap it up for my thoughts on this one, though. It was an awesome ride. I pretty much loved it the entire way through. It never really dropped down for me. I didn't get bored. There was no slogginess to it as some other books that I've read this year. I really, really enjoyed this one, guys. So that's going to do it for this review. Please like and subscribe as always, and drop in the comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on this entire series. If you liked it, hated it, if you've read anything else by Sebastien de Castell. I know he's got like Spellslinger and some other things that he's written. I would love to explore more of his works if it's anything similar to this, because I love this so far. But yeah, just let me know your thoughts, and until next time, everybody, keep reading.